The living room buzzed with chatter as cousins and grandchildren filled every seat. The smell of roast chicken hung in the air, mixing with my sister's famous apple pie cooling on the kitchen counter. I settled into the corner armchair, watching my family laugh and share stories. This was what I lived for, moments when everyone came together, when the house felt alive with voices and love. My son Jake was telling everyone about his promotion at the construction company. My nephew Tommy showed off pictures from his wedding last month. Even my elderly mother managed to crack jokes from her wheelchair. For once, I thought I'd have a peaceful evening surrounded by the people who mattered most. But across the room, I noticed my daughter Claire staring at me with cold, steady eyes. Her arms were crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't said much since arriving an hour ago. Something in her silence felt different tonight. Not the comfortable quiet of someone enjoying family time, but the heavy stillness before a storm. I tried to catch her eye and smile, but she looked away quickly. My chest tightened with worry. After 32 years of being her father, I knew that look. What she said next cut deeper than anything I ever imagined. Dinner was going smoothly until Claire stood abruptly, her chair screeching across my sister's hardwood floor. The sound cut through the warm conversations like a knife. Everyone looked up from their plates, forks halfway to their mouths. With a voice sharp enough to pierce stone, she said, "You never helped me. You were never there for me. You're useless." The words hung in the air like poison. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. The room went completely silent. No clinking plates, no whispered conversations, no children giggling in the background. Even my 3-year-old grandson stopped babbling and stared. My breath caught in my throat. Heat rose in my chest, spreading through my arms and legs like fire. In that instant, every eye in the room turned toward me. My mother's face crumpled with shock. My sister's mouth fell open. My brothers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They were all waiting for my response, waiting for me to defend myself, to fight back, to explain. Claire stood there with her chin raised, daring me to contradict her in front of the family that respected me. Instead of speaking, I let the silence bury me alive. Her outburst hadn't come from nowhere. Just the week before, she had called me with excitement in her voice. She wanted me to co-sign for a brand new BMW, $35,000 of shiny metal she couldn't afford on her receptionist salary. I had said no, not out of spite or cruelty, but because I wanted her to learn responsibility. At 32, she needed to understand the weight of her own financial choices. I suggested she save up for a reliable used car instead, something within her budget. The phone had gone quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was ice cold. "I should have known you'd let me down again." That conversation replayed in my mind as I sat in the suffocating silence of my sister's dining room. Claire had twisted my refusal into proof of my supposed neglect. To her, money equaled love. Denying her meant denying her worth. In her mind, every dollar I didn't spend on her was evidence that I didn't care. I realized this wasn't about the car at all. This was about rewriting history. The entire table expected me to yell, to defend myself, to list all the ways I had supported her over the years. My brother Mike cleared his throat, ready to jump in. My sister's husband put down his fork, preparing for a family argument. Instead, I sat completely motionless. My hands remained folded in my lap. I didn't even look up from my plate. The silence stretched on, growing heavier with each passing second. I wanted her words to hang in the air, unchallenged, echoing in everyone's minds. Let them think about what she had just said. Let them remember who I really was compared to the villain she was trying to paint. Claire shifted uncomfortably, clearly expecting a reaction. When none came, she smirked as though she had won some invisible battle. Her shoulders relaxed. She thought my silence meant defeat. Inside, though, I felt the deepest betrayal a father could know. My own daughter had tried to destroy my reputation in front of the people whose respect meant everything to me. But beneath the hurt, something else was growing. Because unlike her, I had proof. For decades, I had kept a thick brown folder tucked away in the back drawer of my study desk. It wasn't something I looked at often, just occasionally when paying taxes or organizing old paperwork. Most people throw away receipts after a few years, but I had always been a saver. Inside that folder were receipts, bills, bank statements, and transfer slips. Every medical expense, every tuition payment, every emergency loan. It was all there, documented in black and white. Not kept for pride or to hold over anyone's head, but simply because that's who I was. Organized, methodical, prepared. Hospital bills from the night she was born when she nearly didn't survive her first week. Tuition payments from private school through college. Rent checks when she was struggling in her 20s. Medical expenses for surgeries and therapy. Credit card payments I had made to keep her from drowning in debt. Every line item told a story of sacrifice. Every signature represented a choice to put her needs before my own comfort. She had no idea how much I had quietly cared for her over the years. And now, those forgotten stories would become my weapon. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bedroom floor with papers spread across the carpet like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. One by one, I pulled out memories I thought would never need proof. The emergency room visits when she was 8 and couldn't breathe during asthma attacks. I had sat in those plastic chairs for hours, holding her small hand while machines beeped around us. The bills had been crushing, $3,000 for one night. My insurance covered most of it, but the copays and medications added up. The surgery after her college accident when she broke her leg in 3 places. 6 months of physical therapy at $80 per session. She was on my insurance, but I had paid every deductible without complaint. The therapist bills during her depression in her mid-20s. Week after week, I transferred money to Dr. Martinez's office so Claire could get the help she needed. She never asked how those sessions were being paid for. My eyes burned as I stacked the papers into organized piles. My chest felt tight with both grief and growing resolve. By dawn, the folder was thick enough to crush her lies. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't shower or watch the morning news like usual. I just sat at my kitchen table, organizing 32 years of documentation. Each receipt was a nail in the coffin of her accusations. Medical expenses went in one pile. Education costs in another. Emergency loans and debt payments in a third. The amounts were staggering when seen all together. I had never added them up before, but seeing it all laid out, I realized I had probably spent over $200,000 supporting her throughout her life. Money I had earned through overtime shifts, weekend work, and careful budgeting. Vacations I had skipped, restaurant meals I had avoided, clothes I had worn until they fell apart. Also, she could have what she needed. I wasn't planning revenge for anger's sake. I wasn't trying to hurt her or make her feel guilty. I simply wanted her to see. To truly understand what sacrifice looked like when it was invisible, when it happened without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. And the stage for that truth would be the next family gathering. The following week, my sister called to invite everyone for Sunday dinner again. After what happened last time, she said carefully, maybe Claire needs to apologize to you. I told her not to worry about it. Let's just have a nice family meal, I said. What I didn't mention was the thick folder I would be carrying under my arm. When I walked into my sister's house that Sunday, Claire was already there, sitting in the same spot as before. She smiled at me as if nothing had happened, as if she had already buried my reputation for good. Her confidence was striking. Relatives hugged me when I arrived, though I could feel their unease. They remembered her words from the week before, and some were probably wondering if there was truth to them. I sat quietly, making small talk, refusing to spark any suspicion. All the while, my fingers traced the edge of the folder resting on my lap. I had organized everything perfectly, each section marked with small tabs, each receipt in chronological order. Tonight, silence would not be my weapon. Truth would. Dinner passed with forced politeness. Everyone was being extra careful with their words, walking on eggshells to avoid another confrontation. Claire laughed louder than usual, telling stories about her job and her weekend trips, basking in the attention. She thought she had written the final chapter of our story last week. Her version where I was the neglectful father who never sacrificed anything for his ungrateful daughter. She seemed relaxed, confident that her narrative had stuck. I listened and nodded, eating my sister's pot roast while my pulse pounded in my ears. The folder sat beside my chair, waiting. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind dozens of times over the past week. When dessert was served and everyone was settling back in their chairs with full bellies and relaxed smiles, I knew it was time. The room felt warm and comfortable, perfect for shattering illusions. I reached down and placed the folder on the table, sliding it gently across the wood surface. The movement was subtle, but several people noticed. Eyes flicked toward the mysterious bundle of papers. And then I opened it. I pulled out the first yellowed receipt, handling it like it was made of glass. The paper was creased from years of being folded in filing cabinets, but the words were still perfectly clear. Presbyterian Hospital, I read aloud. Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. Patient, Claire Michelle Thompson. Date, March 15, 1991. I looked up at Claire, whose smile was beginning to falter. She almost didn't make it, I said softly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. 3 weeks in the NICU. Doctors weren't sure she would survive her first month. Gasps circled the table as relatives leaned closer to see the official letterhead. My mother's hand flew to her chest. She remembered those terrifying weeks when we didn't know if Claire would live or die. Claire's face went pale. Her eyes darted between the receipt and the faces staring at her. For the first time in a week, she had nothing to say. That was only the beginning. I laid down tuition payments from St. Mary's Elementary through Lincoln High School. Every semester, every year, documented with my signature and the date paid in full. Private school, I said, running my finger along the payment records. You never knew, but I worked double shifts at the factory to afford this. 60-hour weeks, so you could have smaller class sizes and better teachers. The papers rustled as I spread them across the table. My nephew Tommy picked up one of the receipts and whistled low. Dad, this is $12,000 a year just for high school. Claire's lips parted, but no words came out. She was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Her confident smirk had completely disappeared. Then college, I continued, pulling out the university payment records. 4 years at State. Room and board, meal plans, textbooks. You graduated debt-free while your friends were taking out loans. Murmurs rippled across the table as heads turned toward Claire. Her face was flushing red now, a mix of embarrassment and something that might have been shame. I wasn't done yet, not by a mile. Next came the medical expenses from her teenage years. Hospital bills, specialist appointments, prescription medications. I had kept every single receipt, every insurance statement, every copay record. The car accident your junior year, I said, placing the orthopedic surgeon's bill on the table. Broken ribs, collapsed lung, 6 months of physical therapy. Claire's breathing quickened. She remembered that accident, how scared she had been, how I had held her hand in the ambulance and stayed by her bedside for 3 days straight. You were unconscious when these were signed, I told her, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. But they kept you alive. Every x-ray, every surgery, every follow-up appointment. I never asked you to worry about the cost. My sister picked up one of the bills and her eyes widened. $5,000 just for the emergency room. Plus the ambulance, the surgery, the medications, I said. Insurance covered most of it, but I paid every deductible without question. Claire's eyes darted away, unable to meet my gaze. My relatives exchanged uneasy glances, beginning to understand the magnitude of what I was revealing. The folder still had more stories to tell. I reached for the therapy bills, handling them with particular care. These represented some of the darkest times in Claire's life, and I had never once made her feel guilty about needing help. Dr. Martinez, I said, reading the psychiatrist's name from the letterhead. Twice a week for 8 months when you couldn't get out of bed. When the depression hit you so hard you couldn't work or leave your apartment. The bills were substantial, $120 per session, not covered by insurance because it was considered out of network. But Dr. Martinez had been the only therapist who could help her, so I had paid without question. You thought no one knew how bad it was, I said, my voice growing softer. But I paid for the help you needed. Every session, every prescription, every crisis appointment when you called in the middle of the night. Tears were starting to well up in Claire's eyes, but I couldn't stop now. The truth had momentum, and it needed to be fully told. You told your friends you were handling it yourself, I continued. That you were strong enough to beat depression on your own. And I was about to bring the receipts even closer to home. After Claire graduated college, she had struggled to find steady work. The economy was rough, and entry-level jobs barely covered basic expenses. What she didn't know was that I had been quietly helping with her rent for 2 years. I pulled out copies of checks made directly to her landlord. 24 monthly payments of $600 each. Not loans or gifts she had asked for, but support I had provided without her knowledge. Brookside Apartments, I said, reading the address from the payment stubs. Your first place after college. You told everyone you were making it on your own, that you were finally independent. My brother Jake leaned forward to get a better look at the payment dates. 2 years, he asked, his voice incredulous. 24 months, I confirmed. You worked part-time jobs while looking for something better. I knew you were struggling, so I made sure you had a roof over your head. The whispers around the table grew heavier, more judgmental toward Claire. She was crying openly now, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. But I wasn't finished yet. Still, my sharpest blade remained sheathed. I had saved the credit card statements for last because they represented the most recent sacrifice. Just 3 years ago, Claire had gotten herself into serious financial trouble. Shopping addiction mixed with poor budgeting had created a mountain of debt she couldn't climb. The statements showed balances that made people around the table gasp audibly. Discover Card, $8,200. Chase, $12,500. Capital One, $6,800. Store cards for clothing and electronics that added up to thousands more. You called me crying, I said, remembering that desperate phone call. Said you were going to lose everything. That debt collectors were calling every day. I had paid it all off in one transfer. $32,000 from my retirement savings, money I had been setting aside for my old age. The balances had been reduced to zero overnight. You never asked how I managed to help you, I said. Never wondered where that much money came from. You just said thank you and promised to be more careful. Claire's face had drained of all color. She couldn't laugh this away or explain it differently. The numbers were right there in black and white. And then I revealed the receipt that ended all doubt. My hands shook as I reached for the final document. It was the oldest paper in the folder, yellowed and fragile, but still perfectly legible. The ultimate proof that she owed her very existence to sacrifices she had never known about. Presbyterian Hospital, I read, my voice breaking slightly. Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. Total charges for extended stay, $47,000. The room went completely silent. Even the children had stopped playing and were staring at the grown-ups with wide eyes. This was before good insurance, I continued. Before we knew you would make it. The doctors said you might not survive, but we weren't going to give up. Every treatment, every test, every machine that kept you breathing. I looked directly into Claire's eyes, seeing my little girl who had fought so hard to live during those first terrifying weeks. Without this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, you wouldn't be standing here at all. Silence engulfed the room like a heavy blanket. Claire's tears were flowing freely now, but the damage to her credibility was complete. Her story had collapsed under the weight of 32 years of documented truth. But I wasn't finished with my message. I gathered the papers back into a neat stack, making sure everyone could still see them. The evidence of my sacrifices sat there like an accusation, impossible to deny or explain away. Looking straight into Claire's tear-filled eyes, I spoke the words I had been preparing all week. Love is not measured by the things you demand, I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the dead silence. It's measured by the things already given, even when you never knew they were given. The room seemed to shift around us. Faces that had looked at me with suspicion after her outburst now looked at Claire with disappointment and something close to disgust. Her credibility wasn't just damaged, it was completely destroyed. My mother shook her head sadly. My sister's husband looked away in embarrassment. Even my young nephews seemed to understand that something very wrong had happened here. Claire had come to this dinner thinking she had already won, that her version of events was now accepted family truth. Instead, she had walked into a trap of her own making. But I left her one final chance. Claire covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. The sound filled the room, raw, painful, the cry of someone whose world had just collapsed. I didn't know, she whispered between gasps, her voice cracking with desperation. I didn't know about any of this. But the relatives around the table didn't soften their expressions. They had heard her vicious words the week before, had seen her try to destroy my reputation in front of people who loved me. Her tears weren't enough to erase that betrayal. My sister shook her head in disgust. How could you say those things about your father? She asked. After everything he's done? My nephew Tommy, who had always been close to Claire, looked at her like she was a stranger. This is messed up, Claire. Really messed up. The shift in family dynamics was swift and complete. Claire had gone from being the wrong daughter to being the ungrateful child who had tried to destroy a good man's reputation. Her crying intensified as she realized how badly she had miscalculated. Still, I wasn't looking for revenge alone. Looking at my daughter's broken form, I felt a complex mix of emotions swirling in my chest. This was my child, the little girl whose tiny hand I had held during walks to the park, who had climbed into my lap when thunderstorms scared her, who had once thought I was the strongest man in the world. And now she had tried to destroy me with lies in front of the family that meant everything to both of us. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Some scars never fully heal, and I knew this would be one of them. But revenge wasn't about shouting or cursing or making her feel as small as she had tried to make me feel. Real revenge was about balance. About letting the truth speak louder than lies. About letting actions have their natural consequences. I had loved her unconditionally for 32 years. I had sacrificed my comfort, my savings, my dreams for her future. And she had repaid that love by trying to paint me as a villain who had never been there for her. The folder in my hands represented more than just receipts and bills. It was proof of a lifetime of quiet sacrifice that she had either forgotten or chosen to ignore. And balance meant leaving the truth to linger. I didn't gloat over my victory. I didn't smirk or make cutting remarks about her tears. I simply gathered the papers back into the folder with the same careful precision I had used to organize them. The silence in the room was heavier than any words I could have spoken. It pressed down on everyone, making them think about what they had just witnessed. The transformation from family dinner to courtroom drama to final judgment. Claire avoided every pair of eyes, her hands still covering most of her face. Her confident posture from an hour ago had completely crumbled. The woman who had stood up to publicly humiliate me was now hunched over in her chair like a scolded child. For once in our recent relationship, her power had vanished completely. She couldn't buy her way out of this with charm or manipulation. She couldn't rewrite history when the receipts were sitting right there on the table. I stood up slowly, tucking the folder under my arm. My sister started to say something, but I shook my head gently. There was nothing more that needed to be said, and I walked away with nothing but calm resolve. In the days that followed, my phone rang constantly. Relatives called to apologize for doubting me, even for a moment. My brother Mike's voice was thick with regret when he said, "We almost believed her story." But seeing all that proof, man, we had no idea. My sister called 3 times in 2 days. "I'm so sorry about what happened in my house," she said. "Claire owes you a much bigger apology than just tears." Even distant cousins and family friends had heard about what happened. The story spread through our extended family like wildfire, not as gossip, but as a cautionary tale about gratitude and truth. My reputation hadn't just been restored, it had been fortified with concrete evidence. People who had known me for years now had documented proof of the kind of father and man I really was. Claire, however, had withdrawn completely. No phone calls, no text messages, no appearances at family events. She was embarrassed by her own performance and probably trying to figure out how to face people who now knew the truth. But I didn't chase after her or try to smooth things over, because I knew she would come to me on her own. 2 weeks after the dinner confrontation, there was a hesitant knock at my front door. I opened it to find Claire standing on my porch, looking smaller somehow than she had in years. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her clothes wrinkled like she had slept in them. She stepped inside hesitantly, her hands clutched together in front of her chest like she was trying to hold herself together physically. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry." For the first time in weeks, her tone carried no arrogance, no manipulation, no calculation. Just raw vulnerability and what seemed like genuine regret. I gestured toward the kitchen table, the same table where I had helped her with math homework 20 years ago, where we had eaten countless breakfasts together when she was young and still thought I hung the moon. We sat down across from each other like strangers trying to figure out how to have a conversation. But apologies don't erase scars. Claire explained her frustration with halting words and long pauses. How she had always equated money with love, measuring my care for her by how much I was willing to spend. How she felt unseen and unimportant when I didn't buy her the things she wanted. "I thought if you really loved me, you would give me anything I asked for," she said, tears streaming down her face. "When you said no to the car, it felt like you were saying I didn't matter. I listened in silence. The same protective silence that had served me well at that family dinner. She wanted forgiveness, wanted me to tell her everything was okay, and we could go back to normal. But I wasn't ready for that. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too complete. She had stood up in front of my entire family and tried to destroy my reputation with lies. She had painted me as a neglectful father who had never sacrificed anything for her well-being. She had been willing to damage relationships I had built over decades, all because I wouldn't co-sign for a luxury car. Forgiveness would have to be earned, not just requested. Because forgiveness requires truth, not just regret. I'll always love you, I told her, my voice steady but not cold. You're my daughter, and that will never change. But love doesn't mean enabling lies or pretending this didn't happen. She nodded through her tears, her hands shaking as she wiped her face. For once in our recent relationship, she had no rebuttal, no justification, no way to turn the situation around to make herself the victim. I understand if you can't forgive me right away, she said. I know I messed up bad. I don't know how to fix this. I looked at this broken woman across from me and saw glimpses of the little girl she used to be. But I also saw the spoiled adult she had become, someone who thought love could be bought and sold, who measured relationships in dollar amounts. You fix it by being different, I said. By understanding what sacrifice really looks like. By being grateful instead of entitled. She needed to carry the weight of what she had done. That weight might be the only thing that could teach her to grow into the person she was supposed to become. And maybe that weight would finally make her grow. That night, after Claire left, I sat in my study with the brown folder one final time. I ran my fingers over the receipts and bills, remembering each sacrifice they represented. Hospital visits, tuition payments, emergency loans, quiet support given without expectation of gratitude. As I closed the folder and placed it back in the drawer, I realized something important about the nature of revenge. It doesn't always require fire, fury, or elaborate schemes designed to cause pain. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply letting the truth stand tall in the space where lies try to take root. My daughter had tried to erase decades of sacrifice with one cruel public accusation. She had been willing to destroy my reputation to make herself feel better about being denied a luxury she couldn't afford. She had gambled with my standing in the family, thinking she could rewrite history to cast herself as the victim. But the receipts, my carefully kept receipts, had spoken louder than her accusation ever could. They had told the real story of our relationship, documented in black and white, impossible to deny or distort. She would carry the memory of that dinner for the rest of her life. Every time she thought about asking me for something, she would remember the folder. Every time she felt entitled to more than she had earned, she would recall the faces of family members who had seen the truth. And from that day on, she knew. Truth has a memory longer than any lie. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.